couple episodes ago. He doesn't know what
No,
he's
no, we
saying.
proved that was anime only.
Okay,
We
well,
already
this
checked
happens
that
in anime
yesterday.
too.
And then fucking Zabuza says, "So you made me fly into such a rage that I unraveled the spell holding the water prison together." And Kakashi says, "No, you didn't drop your own spell. It was broken from without." Like, bro, this is so blatantly a good plan for
I don't care what
Naruto.
Kakashi says there. Zabuza is conceding he broke whatever because he was enraged. That's not a good plan.
But then he agrees
Who do you
Kakashi's right.
think has hold on. Who do you think has better analysis of a situation and strategies? Kakashi with his Sharingan or Zabuza?
You mean okay. Okay, we're about to
Be
get
so
into it.
for real right now. Be so for real.
No,
right
I'm
now.
about to say something, and it's about to perfectly segue to another heated debate. You mean
no.
Kakashi, who's actively drowning? Take it away, Kamui.
Who says he's drowning? When do we get an indication that he's struggling?
Ooh, Oodie,
He is
you
submerged
are
in the
screwed.
water
Say-
prison
I'll let you take
jutsu.
this
He
before I can
cannot
He's
heal.
breathe.
immersed in water. What? He speaks while underwater.
Oh, wait, can you continue? Do you need a breeze to talk?
You are not doing this right now.
He literally go back to chapter 14. In chapter 14, when Naruto gets his resolve, Kakashi yells, "What's the matter with you? I told you to run. It's over. It was over the second he caught me. You have your duty. Keep that in mind. We're here to protect Tazuna."
Wait,
he
why
yells
is it over?
all of that from
Why is it
within
over?
the water bubble.
Why does Kakashi think he's gonna die?
Because he's caught. He's
So?
restrained. If you look at the data book profile on this particular jutsu, it immobilizes the opponent.
So he's immobilized. Just wait till he's free.
It doesn't say
So
anything about
Zabuza can
drowning,
take
by
that
the way, in the
big-ass
first data book.
sword and cut him in half, and he can't move.
Can he? Can he cut through the water prison? That would just break the water prison, freeing Kakashi and mobilizing him.
So we know that they're relative in terms of combat speed because we see multiple examples of it. So if they're relative in terms of combat speed, and Zabuza is able to get a full power swing on that sword, and then whenever it hits the water prison, it deactivates the jutsu, but it's only like a foot from him, it's gonna hit Kakashi before he can move out of the way.
Well, no, because I got you right there. They're relative in combat speed. Zabuza has to lug around this heavy-ass sword to hit this dense-ass water prison. You bet he's gonna be slower than Kakashi, who's prepared, expecting, and
prove that it's
gonna
dense?
react.
Can you prove it's dense?
Kakashi can't break out of it because of its density.
That could just be an application of the jutsu.
Okay, so you agree it's dense. What do you mean? I agree.
No, like
it's an application
because it's
of
made
the
of
jutsu.
chakra. It can use chakra to restrain movements.
Okay, this is the same water prison that Kasame does later on to Team Guy and their drowning.
No, Kisame's water prison's different.
Prove it.
Yeah, it is different.
Because Team Guy can't talk to each other in it, and they are drowning, unlike Kakashi.
It's the same jutsu.
But Kisame's is just different. It's
okay. Have you ever considered the fact that it isn't Kisame's jutsu that's different? It's just Kakashi himself. You know, the same Kakashi who has a nose better than Kiba, eyes better than Hinata, etc., etc. This Kakashi.
Yeah, but that goes against like just being a human.
Yeah, and you know what else? Kakashi's described as omnipotent several times, so I don't want to hear it.
In the data book, which is secondary level of canon compared to the manga, as we've already established.
Okay, well, it's secondary canon, but it's in the primary canon right here.
It's
above human.
The term omnipotence. There are multiple definitions for it. One of which includes the perception of how people think about somebody, which means like considered to have nearly unreachable abilities. And like from the perspective of Naruto and co, that would be the case.
Zabuza's hyping up Kakashi at his first appearance. He's viewing him as omnipotence too.
And then I mean
Well,
he's able
definitely
to
not
outmaneuver him
omnipotent,
'cause he's
considering he
rusty.
thought he was gonna win.
If
But
anything, Zabuza's hyping up way more than Team 7 knows about Kakashi in general. If like Naruto's pranking Kakashi in their first appearance. Sasuke didn't even know he
Bro,
had a
okay, so let me
Sharingan.
go back to chapter 12.
Zabuza
I
knows
don't
more.
think there's a I don't think there's a I'm not finding
So
a data book
Zabuza
entry on
considers
this. There
Kakashi
could
more
be, though.
omnipotent than Team 7. There you go. Based on knowledge restraints. It's the most ridiculous way to have this argument, but I love it.
Bro, I'm just glad
let me
that
see what Kakashi says about it.
Sage was on my side here.
Yeah,
Kakashi wasn't drowning.
Congrats,
Of course.
Kamui. You have a delusional person on your unhinged side.
Yo, actually, by the way, Kakashi does call the water heavy.
Let's go.
But that could just be an aspect of so okay, but here's the thing, right? So if you're saying that the blade has to move through the water,
the heavy water,
right?
The
That's what
heavy
you're
blade.
saying. Kakashi also has to.
Well, no, because once the blade hits the prison, then Kakashi's gonna be freed from the prison.
Why?
Because it's just gonna break the water prison.
Well, I mean, okay, so you think the water prison's just gonna shatter and lose all control because he slices through it? I think it's very possible that he can slice through it with it maintaining its hold over Kakashi until he gets like all the way through the water prison and cuts it in half.
I was afraid you were gonna say that.
There's also the possibility that
Like-
anything using Zabuza's chakra can move freely in it, while anyone that isn't Zabuza cannot.
Okay, Sage. The water's heavy, the sword is heavy. Can you prove Zabuza, with his strength and improper leverage, having to swing it with one hand, can you prove this Zabuza can cut through the water prison?
Well, first of all, he uses one hand to swing it normally. Second of all, you could just as easily argue that he swings the sword and then deactivates the jutsu at the last second, which would then mean that the sword has to still cover less distance than Kakashi would have to in order for Kakashi to dodge it. Since they're relative, like with his sword strike speeds and Kakashi's combat speed, that would mean Kakashi is more likely getting hit by it.
We've seen something like this
Also,
happen
by the
before.
way, he can literally make a water clone. He does right after this, and have the water clone cut through Kakashi.
Well, hang on. Okay, well, again, that's another thing that Naruto wasn't considering
He
in
has a
his
clone
strategy.
swinging on both sides.
Like,
Kakashi can hit
Naruto
no matter
wasn't being
what.
smart. Zabuza was being an idiot by not making a clone. Was another thing, but...
Well,
wait,
but if
hold on, say that
Naruto's
again?
smarter than the genius demon Zabuza, that makes him smart.
Also, would the water clone just shatter by trying to swing the sword into this heavy water prison? Like, based on Newton's laws or whatever?
Well, no, because he can. Wait, why?
It would, like, shatter his hands and the rest of his body would just fall
He can
apart.
like the water clones are stated to have equal taijutsu to Zabuza,
But that's not durability.
which would imply equal physicals.
But whatever
Why not?
force you give out, you have to be able to take. And so, I'm assuming
Sure.
that the water prison...
Not in Naruto. Not in
weight-
Naruto. Because the Raikage can't take as much force as he can give out, the third Raikage.
Okay, I'm not debating you right now, Kamui, am I? The Kakashi notes that the water prison's weight is
Bro,
heavy.
this is my topic.
Kakashi never states that Zabuza's water clone is heavy. Therefore, I'm assuming that the clone is less durable than the water prison. Therefore, the clone would break trying to break the water prison.
That's an argument from ignorance. I would say that Kakashi he's not in a position ever to where the shadow clone or the water clones are in a position to where he could recognize them as heavy. He also could have just been saying the water is heavy relative to normal water, which makes sense.
Well, that
which would
argument
just
doesn't
mean
matter
that
either
like that
way.
would apply to the water clones as well. Well,
Well,
because
exactly,
like
because it would just go
if
to the
he's not
clones
like
regardless.
so
It's both water.
right, exactly. So but the what I'm saying is though, like you could just easily argue that like he could have either one of the clones maintain the water prison and then he cut through it himself, or he could have like at what point if you say like your chakra is what determines your physicals, you know, or like it can be a contributing factor into your physicals. If he makes one water clone, that would have half of his chakra. Do you think half of his chakra isn't enough to like cut through the water prison? And
that
again,
he
the
himself
alternative
made.
It
two,
would be less than
yeah,
half
the
because he
alternative
used
two
his
is
chakra to make the water prison.
well, so the alternative two is like I said, Zabuza can take that sword off his back, swing it with one hand, deactivate the water prison at the last moment, and cut Kakashi in half.
But keep in mind, the clone is going to be like 50% of Zabuza. He's swinging it at 100% of Kakashi.
No, this can be just Zabuza by himself. This can be just Zabuza himself.
Yeah, okay, so we're changing it back to just Zabuza.
Like
not the
Zabuza
clone.
doesn't need to make a clone. I'm just saying he has.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm saying he has like he can use the clone to accomplish the same thing. But like if you want to argue that like the clone would like shatter on impact because it's not as durable, then you can just say despite like it, we know that taijutsu is described as like physical attacks. So in order to have equal taijutsu, the physicals must be the same. But even if you disregard that and you say it's inconsistent or you know whatever reason, Zabuza can still take down Kakashi here um without even needing a clone.
Counter, they're relative at the start of the fight when they're both fresh. If Zabuza has to create a jutsu to trap Kakashi, Zabuza has less chakra, therefore Kakashi should be stronger.
I mean, that is arbitrarily applying like chakra standards to their abilities because Kakashi we know is bedridden after this fight due to the overuse of the Sharingan, and he's been using the Sharingan this whole time.
Yeah, after the fight.
Well, right, but like this is in the middle of the fight, like when he's still
before
using the
he's
Sharingan,
bedridden.
and he's out for a week. But he's out for a week, so like you could say like at this point in time he's gonna be out for 2 days or you know some undetermined amount of time. He's very clearly right, but he's very clearly gonna be. He doesn't actually like fall over until he deactivates the Sharingan. Interestingly,
Well, no, that's okay. He can
or not deactivates, covers it.
He can be fatigued, but that doesn't
yeah.
mean he's going to be operating at less than 100%. Like when you're running, let's say a 400 meter, you're going to be running the same speed the entire time, but obviously halfway through the 100 meter, you're going to be out of breath. But you're still going to be running at the same speed.
Yeah, but the problem
You're not
is
running at your top
we
speed the whole
cannot
time,
demonstrate.
though.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, well, and we can't demonstrate that Zabuza's actually used more chakra. Like just because he used the jutsu and Kakashi didn't, Kakashi's using the Sharingan, which also takes chakra. So these two possibilities are like very real. The first possibility is Kakashi just has less chakra than Zabuza, and so using his Sharingan would cause his chakra like levels to drop even further than what, or his chakra would be lower than Zabuza's to begin with. So even if Zabuza uses well, this is possible and you can't like it's not disprovable. But the second one, which is actually what I think is the more likely of the two, is that even if they have similar chakra levels, which I think is kind of like what's expressed because whenever Naruto goes into KN0, they both mistake Naruto's chakra for the other person's. So like that would imply that they both think that that's like a similar amount of chakra to what they have. But we could never demonstrate or provide a likelihood for Zabuza's water prison using more chakra than Kakashi's Sharingan. Like, this is just impossible to demonstrate.
It seems very unlikely, too, given that Kakashi's Sharingan, the whole thing at the time is that it is draining his chakra, and that's definitely not, like, a problem for Zabuza with the water prison.
Yeah.
Well,
and if anything, you could argue Zabuza might have more chakra than him because he does make just like a bunch of water clones in the second fight, hidden mist, all that stuff. Like at this point in time, Zabuza's used the hidden mist jutsu, the water prison jutsu, and then he uses a water clone. and like no signs of fatigue at all. No sweat marks, no like huffing. Like cool, calm, and collected the whole time.
Based on that
You can
argument,
say the
we
same
don't
thing
know
for
if those are
Kakashi. Like,
real water
yeah.
clones, because at the end of that arc, Kakashi makes like 40 normal clones that he calls shadow clones to trick the Gato's men to running away.
Well,
Well,
yeah,
we
but they
know that they're
say the
water clones
jutsu, like
because when they get
Kakashi
hit, they
says clone
Afterwards.
jutsu
Yeah.
when he's pretending it's shadow clone versus the
No,
water
but he says
clone,
it
he just says
also-
afterwards.
water clone.
Why would Zabuza say it afterwards?
well, they also they break apart into water though. Like whenever they're hit, Sasuke takes them down and they like shatter into water.
Okay,
So they're
my
definitely
argument for
water
that,
clones.
have we ever seen a normal clone be shattered?
It's just like
It turns into
misty
smoke.
looking
But
thing.
have
It's
we
just an
seen it?
illusion.
Have we
Yeah,
seen it?
yeah, yeah.
We've seen
I
a normal
think
clone
so,
be
at least in the anime. Maybe it's filler, but I'm not sure.
Because if not, I would
I'm
just argue that
fairly
the normal
positive
clones are
that the water.
I do know one time. I think it does happen. Maybe with like the Aruka testing the Genin filler thing. Maybe there, but I'm not
fairly
fully
certain
confident.
that there's. Oh no, there's definitely a water clone jutsu data book statement. I just need to find it.
Okay. I would also argue
let me
that
see what
Kakashi's
data book
technically
this is in.
always using the Sharingan. It's always activated.
Well, wait, he covers it so that it's not sapping away his chakra.
Which doesn't
I
make
know.
sense, but
I
that's
know.
besides the point.
Well, it's just like, yeah, like you would imagine like you can have an engine running, but and it will take some level of gas, but if you're actually driving, it'll take more gas because it's actually like being operationally used. But
The way I rationalize it is that because he covers the eye, the Sharingan can't like actively analyze what it's seeing because it doesn't see anything,
Yeah.
and that's how he saves chakra with it, but never
Okay.
actually explained.
So I have two scenes for you.
Rin
The
no Show
first scene is we've
224.
seen technically something like this happen twice, actually, in the second bridge fight. Well, the second fight on the bridge, I should clarify. So the first scene is when the mist is activated and Zabuza's about to stab Tazuna and Sakura screams, and then Kakashi jumps in the way and he just tanks the sword and he's bleeding. But like he just tanked Zabuza's sword intended to kill. The full swipe of it.
But he dodged it enough
yeah,
to not get sliced
during-
in half. Like he just got grazed by it.
Well, no,
Well, he
like,
allows
stopped
himself to
the
get hit by
swing.
that. Actually, he states that later on.
But that's my point, though.
Yeah.
He's
Oh,
hit by
are
the
you talking
full
about the
power
first
swing.
time? Yeah, he has hand guards on.
Okay.
Those are specifically stated in the data books. Like, it says that. Oh my gosh, one second.
Doesn't he have them in the first fight?
It's it. So yeah, he has them in the first fight. He
Oh,
blocks
there you
it
go,
with
same
the hand guards, which in the I can't remember which data book it is, but it's
Probably
it's
the first.
implied that he carried those over from his Anbu days.
Yeah.
And they have like a tactical purpose, which would just make sense that the tactical
It
purpose
was actually
would
really
be-
cool. What if that's what
um,
Obito does to block
yeah.
Suigetsu's Executioner's Blade
Well,
attack?
Going
Just
along
has
the
him.
lines of that, he also has like a whole suit. And if Zabuza can't even cut through Kakashi's hand guards, he's not cutting through a full-on thick flak jacket.
I mean, you would have to demonstrate that the flag jacket is more durable than the hand guards, which we actually know isn't true because whenever he comes back as an Edo, he's able to cut right through it.
Yeah.
But he can't fully cut through the hand guards. Like it gets stopped by the hand guards.
Yeah.
Yo, those hand guards are durable as fuck.
So
bro.
the second scene, I think, is a little bit more damning. But I know you can find a counter to this, so it's probably pretty easy. Because I can think of one right now. So the second scene is right after Haku jumps in front of Kakashi's Chidori. Zabuza goes with the one-arm swing against Kakashi, and Kakashi, being encumbered with Haku still in his hands, is still able to jump out of the way. Zabuza was not able to cut through Kakashi.
Yeah, he's for.
Zabuza's mentally nerfed.
No,
so,
he isn't.
So hold on. Yep, that's exactly right. He 100% is. Kakashi comments on how he hesitated before taking him down.
it's canon
Okay,
whether you
okay,
like
no,
it or
no,
not,
no, no.
Oodie.
He
Zabuza
hesitated
is mentally nerfed when he's getting his ass whooped.
before taking him down, not during taking him down. And Kakashi didn't jump out of
No,
the way
he
until.
had hesitation in his swing.
Okay, Kakashi also had
Um,
hesitation. His hand was shaking after Haku.
He had less hesitation than
Wait, hold-
Zabuza.
Zabuza wasn't shaking.
So Kakashi is mad. Kakashi is mad. So if he's shaking, it's because of that. But he straight up just says that Zabuza hesitated before taking him down, which is why he like told him that he can't beat him.
Okay, Sage,
It's 100% a mental nerf.
I just thought of something so good. I'm gonna give you a point and concede on this part of the argument based on this point that I'm giving you.
Okay.
Kakashi wasn't shaking because he was
Okay.
scared. He was shaking out of excitement.
With excitement. Yeah, I already knew where you're going.
Let's go.
No, I think he's just straight up pissed off. Like I'm fairly certain he actually like I don't think he says it directly, but he implies it. He's like how could you, like this person cared about you, blah blah blah.
Yeah, exactly. Like he
Yeah.
gets mad while
But that's
Zabuza's
after.
getting like
And then just
nerfed
beats the
because
shit out
Haku
of him.
died.
He's being mad at Zabuza trying to cut through him. He's not mad at Haku jumping in front of the way. So therefore, Kakashi is not mentally amped or anything, whatever, when Zabuza swings at him.
No. I don't think Kakashi's mentally amped when he. Yeah, I don't think he's mentally amped whenever he jumps away. I think that. Actually, if you
Zabuza's
look
mentally
at
nerfed because he hesitated.
I think
is the-
Kakashi's mentally
the
nerfed
point.
too. Because
So
again,
if
I'm
you go
saying
to-
he's shaking, and you
if
were
you
saying
go to
that
chapter-
he's mad. And so I was sort of implied that he's mentally amped because he's shaking.
If you go to
Shaking with
chapter
excitement.
31. Yeah, if you go to chapter 31, page 8, Kakashi is like, the boy is already dead, and then Zabuza goes to swing, and Kakashi has like an angry face or like a resolved face, and says he's going to come right through the kid to get to me, and then he slashes. Kakashi jumps back, blah blah blah, and then Kakashi says, "This is my fight," like tells them to stay out of it, and
Yeah, like,
then
they're having a
just
full-on
beats up
conversation.
Zabuza like bad.
Yeah, so they're not reacting to Haku at all. They both just stand
No,
there for a
so
couple
so
seconds
this is
before Kakashi reacts to Zabuza trying
so
to swing
this
at him.
is where. Yeah, so this is where it's important. So Kakashi then at the end of it says, "Now there's no way you can beat me. It's over. You just don't get it yet." And then he like stabs him. This is goodbye, demon. Blah blah blah. Now you can't use either arm. Show
Well,
the man
he's
a
saying it
mess. Blah blah
because-
blah. And
yeah,
then it
because
cuts
he
to
can't use
the other
either
thing.
arm.
So then we fast forward to the war arc. This is where this is important. We get to 5:23. That's when the 7 Ninja Swordsmen show up. Blah blah blah.
523 is at the very
I don't know if
end,
it's
is where
he's coming to the kid to get to
slashing at him.
me.
So probably beginning of 523.
Slashes at him. I think it might be before this where he tells me he hesitates. Yeah, here it is. Yeah, so 524. Page 7. He says, "Zabuza, you hesitated to slice through Haku that day. You couldn't hide the unrest in your heart over Haku's death." And it's showing you the flashback to the panel where Kakashi says, "Now there's no way you can beat me. It's over. You just don't know it yet." Like, dog. This is one of the most blatant examples of a mental nerf, I think, in the entire series.
Okay.
I mean, that just kind of just goes to show how Zabuza goes from being pretty even with Kakashi to just getting bodied all of a sudden. Because you'd have to be like,
just beat up.
okay, why wasn't Kakashi beating his ass so well before? It would either be because Kakashi wasn't mentally amped, but then he was, or Zabuza wasn't nerfed, that he was. Or a mix of both.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing, Ood. I'm gonna tell you this. When it comes to this Kakashi stuff, I'm him. This is my shit right here, okay? But yeah, like I think, and I also just so happened to just get done doing a video on mental amps and nerfs. But like, yeah, this is one of
Oh,
the
yeah.
like most blatant examples of
Oh,
it.
I gotta write that down. I should do the biggest mental nerfs in Naruto.
Sage, by the
Write that
way,
down.
so my mental amp nerf video, whatever that I want to do with you, um 29 pages. And this is like screenwriter's
Oh,
script or
nice.
whatever. Yeah, so 29 pages is insane. Obviously, we're not gonna like talk about the whole thing. I have like specific segments. I have Sage, colon, and so we're talking about 17 of these paragraphs only, so don't worry.
Yeah, we can definitely get that just whenever you have
Yeah.
time for it. I am actually I've got a oh, I need to message Captain. I was supposed to record with him
There's
today.
also the video that Oodie mentioned that we're supposed to be doing that I don't even know the topic of.
Oh right. Well, that was a different thing. It was gonna be the wacky versus battle for our channel, and then the something switch fights for Sages, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've got
Yeah,
all
that's
kinds of
right.
stuff that we can do.
Yeah, we'll figure that out. Um, yeah. I mean, hey, if chat has any ideas, let us know.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, so really quick, I just want to address this. First of all, the Edo thing, I don't know if you were using the Edo feats at all, but I will state that somehow Kabuto was somehow amping them, and so they were just like not Edo Tensei nerfed, kind of, or at least it was like a plus and a minus, so we don't know where they were. They could have been as strong as they were, they could have been stronger, but I don't
Yeah,
know.
I
Well,
think
Edo feats
the
are
Edo
nerfed.
nerf is
I think they
only
just give
ever
you like
like
different implications at different points. Like,
yeah. So the Edo nerf is only ever actually confirmed for the Edo Hokage, and then we get confirmation of it for Madara. But his Edo nerf is crazy because like he's below his alive self while he has the Rinnegan in both eyes, and then whenever he actually like get acquires Hashirama's Sage Mode and gets one of his Rinnegan, that's when Hashirama's like, "Oh, he's regaining his former strength." So like we know for
actually, I think
because
he
of
says it before he gets the stage mode.
well, yeah, you're right. It's whenever he like just gets revived physically. He's regaining his former strength. So we know that like in Edo, he was weaker, even with the Hashirama cells on him and the Rinnegan,
Which
he
is
was
so
weaker than he was
ridiculous, bro.
insane.
Like
Like insane. But
Well,
then with the Edo Hokage, we know that they're nerfed because Toby Rama says that we're brought back close to our full strength. But there is no such statement or implication for the other Edos. You could argue that like the more powerful the Edo is, the more it has to be nerfed in order for Kabuto to have any level of control. So you have characters like Hashirama, Tobirama, Madara, who are like on a different tier than everybody else, basically. And so like Asuma, for example, like seems more impressive as an Edo, but that could be because he's actually like fighting at his full strength because he doesn't have to be like Edo nerfed because there's no reason for him to be Edo nerfed. He can Kabuto can control him just fine.
dude,
But yeah, so
this
I
isn't
think
about your argument, but this is the problem with like the way it's done. Because the way it should work is that when Kabuto takes over, erases their mind and stuff, that's when
Mhm.
like these nerfs should be in place. But
Yeah,
Kabuto wasn't controlling Madara. When Madara is just doing what he wants, he shouldn't be nerfed. There's no limit.
yeah,
There's nothing like this. It doesn't matter how strong Kabuto is because he's not trying to control. It shouldn't be a thing.
yeah. Well, and that's why I say with like those levels of characters, like so for the Edo Hokage, for example, they get brought back, and Orochimaru is like, "Oh my god, like Hashirama is so strong, I can't even repress him. Like he's just choosing to allow me to." So we know that there's a certain power threshold at which, like, relative to the user or caster of the jutsu, the Edos can just overpower their control. Um, so if that's the case, then it makes sense for Kabuto to bring back these characters like close enough to their full strength to where they can do like crazy damage, but far enough away from their full strength to where where they like can't break the control of the Edo Tensei.
Yeah. To address this point,
The problem though is that Madara could as it was, so he didn't bring him back weak enough to control.
Yeah, exactly. Well, same thing with Hashirama. Like Orochimaru brought him back too strong, but he brought like Tobirama got brought back close to his former power, but it wasn't enough to break the control. It was just enough to like kind of resist it a little bit, you know. So like
The way
depending on
I
the
think
level
it
of the
should
character.
be is that Orochimaru was just strong enough to suppress full power Tobirama or whatever you want to do there, but he's not strong enough for Hashirama. But Orochimaru chooses to bring him back full power. For Kabuto and Madara, he chose to bring back Madara full power so that he could be whatever. That's fine. Or he chooses not to so that he can control him. But then he should have a line saying, you know, like, but I can still control you because I didn't bring you back for whatever, you know what I'm saying? But that's all they did.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, like with Madara, his Edo nerf is so severe that having Hashirama cells on his chest and having two Rinnegan wasn't enough to get him back to his full power. So it's like
It's
we know that
ridiculous.
he's nerfed. We know the Hokage are nerfed, but we don't know for the other characters. And like why the nerf even happens. I think it's a control thing because it's like we actually have some evidence for that because uh I'm pretty sure Kabuto says like the level of control that you have um is like directly contributed to like the level of power of the Edos themselves. And so like if you want to have more control over their movements, you have to have like a tighter binding seal that then like restricts their strength more, which is like sort of referring to what Orochimaru did during the Konoha Crush arc. But then if you want them to be stronger, then you have to like relinquish a little bit of that control and send them on like autopilot.
Exactly, but that's why
So
I'm
yeah.
saying that when it comes to Madara, where Kabuto had no intention of controlling him, he should just be full power plus the apps.
Unless he's, I mean, because Kabuto is smart, he's got to know that like Madara might rebel against him. So he may have just like thought that he brought him back weak enough to where he could repress him if he needed to, but then he just didn't get the chance because Madara was basically doing everything he wanted him to do up until he like brought himself back to life. You know, and then
But
it
and
was like,
that's why
oh
I think they
no.
should have just had a line of Kabuto saying something
Yeah, it would have been
like,
helpful for sure.
but you know, like this isn't like about the argument series, just about like the story. Like they should have taken either just added the line or changed it slightly in some manner so that it just is a little bit more cohesive.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you.
Okay.
But anyway,
Well, back to this. Um, so you can't say based on this that he hesitated during the slicing through because we already saw that he could have been hesitating going into it in the same way that Kakashi was. And even if Zabuza was hesitating, you could say that Kakashi was also hesitating.
why would Kakashi hesitate to dodge a guy swinging a knife at him?
Because he didn't.
Yeah, he just says, Zabuza, you hesitated.
Swinging the knife. He just stood there.
He said you hesitated to slice through Haku that day. You couldn't hide the unrest in your heart over Haku's death. If he's saying that he hesitated to slice through him and that he couldn't hide the unrest in his heart, that just like is definitionally a mental nerf.
But they're
like,
not showing
he's just
those
operating
scenes.
below his own self.
They're showing the scenes where Zabuza loses physical access of his arms because of the kunais paralyzing his arms.
But that doesn't really matter because that's not what he's talking about here. He's talking about him slicing through Haku. So we know that you hesitated to slice through Haku that day. You couldn't hide the unrest in your heart. The reason why they're showing those two panels is because it's telling us why he said that.
Well, that's your interpretation.
Because he says this not because
together.
Okay, so the most let me say it this way then. I would say it's likely that the reason these panels are here is because it's explaining what he meant when he said that, which is why it's followed up by this statement, because it's most pragmatic to utilize these panels in this way with that explanation because it requires no extra explanation. it's
whereas
less
I agree,
pragmatic to say that yeah.
it's likely.
Yeah, so
But
it would be less pragmatic to say that like these are here for no reason or disconnected from his statement. It's far more pragmatic to say that they're connected, meaning that whenever he talks about him hesitating and having unrest in his heart, that it's referring to this statement where he says, "You can't beat me. You just don't know it yet." So that's why he couldn't beat him. Like that's what he's sort of
it
referring to there.
should be most likely, but Kishimoto isn't perfect. He's human. He makes other errors, mistakes, retcons, etc. His paneling also isn't perfect at other parts, and so we cannot say for definitive proof that this would be the case. So even if it's the most likely because other interpretations exist, we cannot go with that interpretation.
With the interpretation as a likelihood. Like that's how like most debate points go anyways. Like you can
I'm
never
saying this would be
actually
the
prove
exception.
anything. Like you could say that this statement, well okay, well if it's the exception, then it's going against the likelihood, which would then just like make the interpretation I'm using more likely, unless there can be a
No. I'm
likelihood
saying that
established on the other end that the exception to the rule is more likely.
your interpretation is what should be most likely, but that doesn't mean it is the case or the most likely case.
Sure, but in order to defend that take, to claim like actually claim that, you would have to then follow up with a likelihood as to why the alternate interpretation
Not in this case.
um
I can draw
is more
skepticism
likely.
because we have no frame of reference for Kishimoto's interpretation or state of mind or being when drawing these three panels. We're just making our own interpretation
Right,
based
but
on the
you
material.
sure. But like okay, so if I make a claim and then you make a counterclaim and then I provide likelihood for my claim, you in order for your claim to go through your counterclaim, it can no longer be a possibility claim, it has to be a likelihood claim. So I said these are connected, that him hesitating and him having unrest in his heart is the reason why Kakashi said that he can't beat him here. The likelihood I established for that is that it's the most pragmatic way to go about it, and this is typically how Kishimoto and other mangaka will display something like that. You then said, well, that's not always the case. Kishimoto doesn't always use the best paneling and he doesn't always do that. So this could be the exception. So by saying that, you're acknowledging that this is, if that were the case, this would be the exception to the rule. But in order to make a claim that the unlikelier thing is happening here, you would have to provide a likelihood for why it's happening here or why it's more likely to be happening here.
Okay, I disagree that I would need to present the likelihood case, but I think we both presented our case. We both disagree. Kamui, would you be willing to judge this point?
Not gonna lie, I kind of tuned out for a brief minute.
Okay, is Rain in the audience still? No, he's not. Okay, well. You know what? We'll get judgment on the point.
So okay, so
Doesn't matter.
Kamui, essentially,
I mean, the problem is I'm gonna be biased towards Sage of the Cavs anyway, just because I agree with his stance.
Okay, well,
So like, I
then
just
I
well,
no longer
even
request you as a
disconnect
judge.
yourself
You're
from that.
openly,
So
blatantly admitting bias, which you should not
So-
be as a judge. So
yeah, like
never
I'm
mind.
being honest.
Okay, well, never mind then.
but okay, so Ood, you would agree that if I make a claim, as it's essentially a possibility claim. If I say this could be what's happening here, and then you say, well, actually, this could be what's happening here, and then I say, well, this is more likely to be what's happening
Based on your
because of
interpretation.
X, Y, Z.
But the XYZ is your
But you
interpretation rather
agreed
than
that
something that you can point to in the series or frame of reference for production itself.
no. I said it's more pragmatic, and you agreed to that.
But that's
You agreed it would be more pragmatic.
Yeah, and that's going under the assumption.
The issue is Oodie said it should be more likely.
Exactly.
Not
That's
that
what
it
I'm
was.
saying.
That's
So
going
if it,
because
if,
at all
but-
times the
okay.
manga should be as pragmatic as possible, perfectly so. But it isn't always the case because it's not a perfect world. So even though it should be the
Is
case,
it
doesn't
generally
necessarily
the
mean it is
case?
the case. It should be most likely, but that doesn't mean it is. We
is
just don't know.
Is it generally the case? Do you think that Kishimoto is generally a non-pragmatic writer?
I think that's subjective.
I mean, if it's more likely that it is pragmatic, I think you would have to go with that, to be fair.
Like in order to have a coherent story, it must be the case that most of the time things are used pragmatically, like paneling and statements are used in a pragmatic way. Otherwise, it cannot be a fully coherent story. I think
No,
we would
whoa,
agree
you
that
just changed it. You
the
just changed it
story
from coherent
itself.
to fully coherent.
Yeah.
What percentage would be considered coherent? Another word would be consistent. What percentage of the story needs to be coherent? And then does
So
Kishimoto
okay. So
generally
in order,
have
let
it
me.
both?
So a coherent story is one that can be consistently understood through the totality of the story in a way that so in order for like this to be coherent, right? You would have to be able to look at the panels and say, okay, this happens and then this happens and this statement's made and then this statement is made. There's an order of events that's taking place. This order of events makes sense. What people are saying makes sense. And if it was mostly not pragmatic, then most of the story would be super difficult to understand, if not impossible to understand. Therefore, you wouldn't have a coherent story. So the fact that we do have a coherent story means that
Well, we have
this
a
story
mostly
is mostly
coherent story.
pragmatic.
Yeah,
Well,
subjective.
the point is, well,
Okay,
no,
okay.
the
So then, okay,
yeah.
dude, what that means then? What that means is that we have a likelihood established then. If more often than not the story is coherent and pragmatic, that means that it's more likely that this event, the way that this paneling and moment is done, is coherent and pragmatic, which would then provide likelihood for this being pragmatically done, which then lends credence and likelihood to my argument. So then, in order to counter that argument,
I
you would have
disagree
to provide likelihood for the
because
count.
well, no, because
What? Why?
you're not basing that based on something in the manga itself. You're basing that based on the general premise, which would be circular. Your argument is that Naruto is generally a coherent series, which makes it logical and consistent. I agree. Generally, it's logical and consistent, but
Yeah.
I'm saying that there are inconsistencies and illogical things, which makes it not fully coherent, which means we can't just generally apply it. We would have to look at the case by case scenario, in which case you have not presented a reason based on the series or production value itself of which so why this in particular would be coherent. It would just be your obvious
Well,
subjective interpretation.
I'm not saying it is. I'm saying it's more likely to be because of the fact that you've already agreed that the story is generally, which would mean more often than not, coherent and pragmatic. So you've already agreed whether it's 51% or if it's 95% coherent and pragmatic, you've already agreed that more often than not, the manga itself is coherent and pragmatic. That means that statistically speaking, this is more likely to be coherent and pragmatic than not.
It should be more likely, but based on what averages are, we're not looking at the average, we're looking at whether it is or isn't in reality, because we're discussing this not hypothetically, but literally, and so you'd have to point to something specific rather than a general observation.
So, okay,
Well,
but
no. I mean, it's not. You're
yeah.
still wrong about this. Should be more like. It still is more likely that you're just.
Yes.
What you said at the end is more like, okay, well, is it
No.
the case or not?
So yeah,
But that's
so
separate from the
essentially,
likeliness.
reason
It's
for
still
this-
more
if
likely
we can,
that it
if we
is
can agree,
consistent.
Comment
The
the-
question is, well,
yeah,
is
so
it
if
the
we have-
actually
reason for this
consistent?
is because
if we have
yeah.
100 if we have 100 fruits, right, 100 fruits, and 60 of them are apples and then 40 of them are pears, okay, you can pick randomly out of that, and you're going, generally speaking, most consistently, you're going to pick out an apple. That doesn't mean that pears don't exist in that bunch, but it does mean that if you're just looking at it in a vacuum and you're saying without any other evidence to support the alternative, it is statistically more probable that you're going to pull an apple out than a pear.
No, because here's
So
where this is fallacious.
I'm saying
Based on that analogy, because I don't think that's necessary. Well, it is analogous, but this premise is incorrect. Because your argument is that because it's most likely to be an apple, we have to go with the interpretation that it is an apple. I'm saying because there's pears in
No.
this thing, even though apples are most likely, because we have no other information, this is just a mystery fruit. We don't know whether it is an apple or a pear. We disagree on it. Because both could exist, the interpretation is there for the other. That means we cannot know. It could be either, and without something specific to point to, without any extra context or information about what this particular fruit we're discussing is, not the general population, but the one selected from the population pool that we have. We're arguing about this one in particular, not the population pool, but this one. Without any more information, we don't know, so the probability goes out the window. We cannot say.
Well, no, because
which
the
one
point
it
is when you
The
have the two
probability doesn't go
possible
out because,
interpretations,
well,
you go with the one
if
that's
I
more
made
likely.
yeah,
You,
if I made a certainty claim, you would be correct. If I said this is definitely how this is going down, that's not what I said. This is most likely because of the fact that the story is generally pragmatic in the way that the paneling is set up. So I
okay.
established a likelihood claim, not so we both established a possibility claim. This could be happening, X could be happening, Y could be happening. Then I said, well, I believe that X is more likely to be happening because we have a consistency for this to be more likely to happen in general. So I've applied likelihood to my claim.
Okay. I think you're changing the goalposts, assuming if you did establish a that it's not a certainty at the beginning and it is likelihood, then sure. I'm pretty sure I'm the one that brought up likelihood.
Yeah.
But if you didn't, then it would be going based off of your interpretation versus my interpretation. And our interpretation is going to be based on likelihood, of which case we're throwing that out because that's nothing in this case, which means we wouldn't know. Which means I would
mean it's nothing. If we both make so if we both make a possibility claim, which is a this could be what's happening, or I believe this is what's happening, that means we have equal interpretations. But then I provide the evidence of, well, generally, and you accepted this evidence, generally in the Naruto story, because it's a coherent story, that generally it must be pragmatic. So that this means that more often than not, the story is written in a pragmatic way, a pragmatic and coherent way. You agreed with that. You also agreed that this would be the most pragmatic way to do the paneling, that like the way that I'm breaking it down is the most pragmatic way to do it. So you're saying that
I did not agree with that. No, I did not agree with that part.
it not only you did. You said you said I agree that would be the most pragmatic way to do it. But you said I agree that would be the most pragmatic way to do it. But Kishimoto isn't always pragmatic in how he does his paneling. That's what you said.
Okay, I know what you mean. I didn't say that okay. I'm saying that that should be the way it's done, but because it's not a perfect series, it's not the way that it's done.
Oh, wait, you're saying what's not the way that it's done?
That
this isn't written in a pragmatic way?
Not always.
Because you said the series is generally pragmatic.
Generally,
which means that more often than not, it's pragmatic.
Yeah, again, it's because you would be referring to the general
I agree
population.
with that.
And so when looking at a singular fruit, we can say that it's more likely to be an apple than a pear. But we can't say that this fruit is 60% an apple. It's mostly an apple. Therefore, we have to go with the idea that it is an apple. Because you can't apply something
but
from
if
the
you and I,
general population to the singular.
If you and I had somebody, if we knew that there's 100 fruits in this basket, 60 of them are apples, 40 of them are pears, we had somebody else go pick one out at random, and then you and I were like, well, which one is it? It could possibly be an apple, it could possibly be a pear. And then I said, well, I think it's more likely that it's an apple because we know that generally in that batch, the majority of the time, it's going to be an apple. If you were to pick out each and every scene in the Naruto manga, most of the time, not even 60-40, it's probably closer to 90, but like even if we just go generously say 60-40, most of the time, because it's a coherent story, you would be looking at a pragmatically written scene. And you already agreed to that. that most of the story must be pragmatic in order to
So
have a coherent story.
that would be
So
disanalogous
if
for
that's
two
the case,
reasons.
and I was like,
First of all, it wouldn't be a third party because it's specifically us within the context of our conversation. Second of all, it's not choosing a random
well, hold on. So
fruit. It's
the
choosing a
reason
very
why,
specific
yeah, so
direct
the
scene.
reason
We
why
went
I
to this
chose,
one in particular. Yeah.
I'm aware of that, but you and I are talking about whether or not this is a pragmatically written scene. You said that this could be a non-pragmatically written scene. I said I believe it's likely to be because statistically speaking, if you were to pick any scene in Naruto, you're more likely to find a scene that's written pragmatically as opposed to the opposite of that. So, if you agree with that premise, then that just verifiably in a vacuum makes this a more likely pragmatically written scene than a non-pragmatically written scene. So, if we know that's the case, and we've established that, that means that you would then have to provide some sort of extra evidence for why this is likely to not be pragmatically written.
Okay. I think what this goes down to is whether or not certainty was established at the beginning of the debate, because I thought that you did not establish likelihood, you established certainty. But I think that's just what this debate would come down to, is that point.
Yeah, well, okay, so let's just say for the sake of this, I mean, to be fair, we weren't like in an official debate.
No, I
We
know, I know, I
started
know.
debating this particular topic
I
as we
know,
got
it's
into it.
kind of
You know what I
funny.
mean? So like, if I would never like say like this is certainly a pragmatically
I
written
know,
scene
I
because
know.
there's no way I could prove that.
Yeah.
But I do think that these two things are connected because Kishimoto generally writes things pragmatically, and if this is written pragmatically, it makes sense. So like if he is using essentially the words that we have, if we take them as they are and we take them at face value in the way that they're represented, because the understanding this in a pragmatic way allows for it to make sense, that would just contribute to the idea that it is pragmatically written, which then means that it is referring to this moment, right?
Yeah.
Um, so let's just assume that I didn't make a certainty claim, or if I did, that I then pivoted to a likelihood claim when I realized that we were like actually debating the point. With that being said, you would agree that it's more likely that this scene is written pragmatically, and therefore it would support the position that I had of like this is more likely to be talking about him hesitating to slice through Haku, having rest in his heart. That's why he said he couldn't beat him.
I agree to that first sentence, not the second one. I agree that it is more likely. I do not agree that that supports your point because I do not believe that this increases your interpretation. I think this has no bearing on your interpretation because it's about the general population rather than the selected point, which also we didn't include, but waiting would also disprove this because let's say there's hypothetically 30 uh have you played Call of Duty Zombies, Sage? Hello?
Yeah, yeah. I've played Call of Duty Zombies. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, can you
So
hear me?
in yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, there we go.
In Call of Duty Zombies, there's the mystery box. So let's just say there's 26 weapons in the mystery box, but then there's certain weighting. So you're more likely to get a common weapon than a rare weapon, a wonder weapon. And so that would also sort of disprove this as well.
Right, but that's an additional factor that's observable and that you can point to. You haven't pointed to an additional factor that would affect the probability here.
I believe that the fact that you chose the scene would increase its weighting. It would be more likely to be pragmatic. In
Wait,
some
why?
because you're not choosing it at random. You're
It would
choosing
be
it in the context of a debate to make your other point of the narrative thing.
wait. So
So
you just said it would be more likely to be
No, but then if it's
pragmatic.
more
If it's more
likely that
like,
it's pragmatic, that definitely supports his point.
yeah,
no, that
that
doesn't
supports
support
my
his point
claim.
because likelihood it doesn't matter in this argument. Is my argument.
Well, what you just said is that first of all, so you agreed that generally the Naruto series is written pragmatically.
Yes.
Then you just said that because I chose this scene is more likely to be pragmatically written. So if this scene is more likely to be pragmatically written, that supports my conclusion because my conclusion follows from this being pragmatically written.
Yeah, it follows from it being pragmatically written, not from it being likely to be pragmatically written. Because you would have to prove that it
Okay,
is
but if
pragmatically
okay,
written,
so
which would go back to
mean
certainty.
that would mean that my premise is more likely because
Your
but
premise
so
is on a
my
certainty
premise
claim based on that.
no my premise is not a certainty claim. It's a likelihood claim. So if I'm saying if you just agreed that this is more likely to be written pragmatically, not only because generally the story is written pragmatically, but also because I selected this, therefore it's more likely to be pragmatically written. That would mean that my conclusion of this scene is more likely to be referring to, or to be pragmatically written, right? So like that feeds into the final point. You just agreed to that, which would then lead to the conclusion of this scene is likely referring to that moment whenever he whenever he says that he hesitated to cut down Haku and he couldn't hide the rest in his heart. The flashback that takes place one panel before that, where he says, "You cannot defeat me. You don't even know why." That because that's the most pragmatic way to write this to understand it, because connecting those two things in that way would be the most pragmatic way to do that. If you just said that this scene is more likely to be pragmatically written, and this being pragmatically written supports the likelihood of my claim being true, my claim being true is more likely.
Well, because this is just one point of the larger debate. You're pointing to the scene in particular, and so what Sage is doing, he's pointing to the scene and saying that because this scene is pragmatic, the scene follows logically, and it would apply to the argument
Because it's
to make his
likely to
previous
be more
argument.
pragmatically
Yeah,
written. Yeah.
but you would have to prove that the scene is pragmatic, not that it's most likely, for the point to go through for your previous argument that was going into this
I
one.
said because I said I think that this is more likely to be written pragmatically.
But it would have to be
That's what I said.
pragmatic to support your point.
No, it would have to be more likely to be written pragmatically in order to make my conclusion more likely. It doesn't
No, because your conclusion
so in order to prove
hinges.
in order to prove mine as a certainty, like in order to prove a certainty claim, yes. If I were to say this is like there is no other way, this is how this is, then yeah, I would have to prove that this is pragmatically written. But if I say I think this is likely that these speech bubbles that Kakashi says, Zabuza, you hesitated to slice through Haku that day, you couldn't hide the unrest in your heart over Haku's death. My claim is I think this is more likely to be referring to or that moment when he says, "Now there's no way you can beat me. It's over. You just don't know it yet."
Yes, exactly.
That's what he was referring to, the unrest and right.
Yeah,
Like
so
I
well,
said, I think it's likely
for
that
that,
that's what he's referring to there. So since that's a likelihood claim, I have to provide likelihood for it. You just agreed, and my likelihood is that this is likely to be written pragmatically. And if it is written pragmatically, then it supports my claim. So since it is more likely to be written pragmatically, you just agree to that, that would support my claim.
for
Because it's not a
this,
certainty claim. If it was a
the
certainty claim, I would agree with you.
whether or not the scene is pragmatic isn't the conclusion. It's what's in contention right now to substantiate your point, which is the conclusion. That goes back to the argument from chapter 31 of what Kakashi's talking about. So
So
the pragmatism
yeah,
isn't the conclusion.
so then what you're asking yeah, so then what you're asking me to do now then is to bridge the gap between it being pragmatic, like between if this scene is pragmatically written, why does my conclusion follow? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying that your so far, and we don't have to go beyond this, but your conclusion hinges on the fact that this is pragmatic, and you're saying that the scene is most likely to be pragmatic. But you would need the scene to be
No,
pragmatic to substantiate your point.
no, my conclusion doesn't hinge on that because my conclusion is a likelihood.
No, the
My
likelihood is
argument
about
is
the
a likelihood.
pragmatism, but this pragmatism isn't your conclusion. It's evidence to support your conclusion.
Okay, so if okay, so my conclusion is this scene is most likely like the what Kakashi is saying here is most likely referring to the speech bubble or to the panel right next to it.
No, I disagree.
That's my conclusion.
Your
These
conclusion is that it
that was my
is.
conclusion.
Your conclusion is that it is, and then yet your
No.
argument is that that is most likely based on the fact that it's most likely to be pragmatic.
No, okay, so what I was arguing is that this is most likely referring like the what Kakashi is saying in that left panel is most likely referring to what he was saying in the right panel, or vice versa. I'm sorry. The right panel is most likely referring to what Kakashi's saying in the left panel, where whenever he says, "You cannot beat me," like, and you don't even know why, that what that's referring to is what Kakashi says in the next panel, where he says, "You hesitated, you had unrest in your heart." That the reason why he couldn't beat him is because of the unrest in his heart, because he had that hesitation from killing Haku. Okay, so my premise or my argument was this is most likely referring to this. And then you said, well, it could be referring, you said it could be referring to something else. And then I said, I think what supports this, what makes this likely, is the fact that the story is written pragmatically in a general sense. So if it's generally written pragmatically, if you just picked any scene at random, you would have a higher likelihood of picking a pragmatically written scene because a higher percentage of it must be pragmatically written in order for the series to be coherent. You then agreed that the majority of the series is written pragmatically because the story is coherent. Then you agreed that it's actually like that because I picked this scene because of waiting, that the scene is more likely to be pragmatically written. So if my conclusion, if my argument the whole time was I think these things are likely referring to each other, and I think they're referring to each other because the story's pragmatically written, and the most pragmatic way or for these two to be referring to each other, it must be written pragmatically. The most pragmatic way to do this paneling would be to have these two things or these two things refer to one another. The conclusion would follow. So what you would be then asking me to do is not prove that it's likely that it's written pragmatically because you already agreed to that. What you would be asking me to do is prove or provide some sort of substantiation as to why the scene being written pragmatically then supports my conclusion.
Okay, so your interpretation of the scene is that these two scenes, these two right panels and then this left panel are connected. That was the original premise. Why? Because of pragmatism, which is most likely. But now you're saying that these two scenes are most likely to be connected because of pragmatism, which is changing the argument. But again, going back to our interpretation, you're saying it based on your interpretation, whereas I'm saying it based on my interpretation of the visuals. So I do think it goes back to that. I personally think that's a good conclusion for both of us. Kamui, thoughts? If you want to do judgment.
Well, hold on. Give me
Go
give
ahead.
me 1 second. So let me go from the assumption that the conclusion is a certainty, right? If I so whenever you're even if I make a conclusion that is a certainty, like my initial claim was I think these two things are connected. Like I think that these two scenes that we're seeing right here are connected. I think this is why he says this. So that's an expression of my belief, which isn't a certainty claim, right? So I didn't say this is 100% the way that this is. This is how this must be. I said I think this is what's going on. So an expression of your belief is just a possibility claim or a likelihood claim, but then you have to substantiate it with evidence if you make a likelihood claim, right? So I said an expression of essentially, I believe that these two things are connected, which is just an expression of belief. It's not a certainty claim. You then said, well, they don't necessarily have to be connected because like there are other explanations. Then I provided a likelihood by saying that because the story is pragmatically written in a general sense, we know that that's the case because it's coherent and it must be mostly written pragmatically in order for it to be coherent, which you agreed with, that it follows that this scene is most likely pragmatically written. If it is pragmatically written, which is the likelihood that has been given, then that supports my conclusion that these two things are connected. So that would mean that my conclusion is more likely than yours.
Okay. I think that's good. That was freaking fun, bro.
Okay.
I do want to take that and just send it to Rain or Chrome or someone and be like, "What do you think?" Just
No,
if
for
he
sure.
does it, yeah. Not like as an official thing, but I haven't debated like that in a while. That was fun and that was freaking tough, bro. That was hard. Like I'm not gonna lie, that was good. That was a good debate. I was
Well, honestly, I think like for part of it, I like it was we were going back and forth, and I think like making really good arguments. Where I think you should what you shouldn't have said is the weighted argument, where
okay,
you were
that's
like,
fair.
well,
That
that
was
just
additional. I didn't.
Yeah,
That was just
that's
a
what
side
I was
point.
just like, all right, that was not a good idea.
yeah.
I don't think it
Because you
hurt
said
my
that
point,
that just
but
makes it more likely to be pragmatic, and I was like, well, if it's more likely to be pragmatic, that's forms my conclusion.
no, I think
But
it
before
was
that,
just
yeah,
it was an additional point for me, but it was
yeah,
disconnected slightly from my main point. It's still connected a little bit, but not like in a way that really furthers my argument. It was just an
yeah.
additional thing. But yeah,
Yeah,
I agree. That's
I
still my
actually
point.
think that the initial claim that I made was that I think Zabuza is mentally nerfed here. Um, and then it backtracks to, okay, I think Zabuza is mentally nerfed here. I think that's
Mhm.
why Kakashi says this. When then I brought the evidence of this chapter 524. And then you questioned why these things would be connected. And then I said, well, because generally the story is pragmatically written, so it makes this more likely to be pragmatically written. Um, yeah. Yeah, okay. So the original point that I made was that I think he's mentally nerfed there, which goes golly, with the reason I made that point is because we were talking about whether or not Kakashi could react to his sword swing from within the fucking
Oh yeah.
from the water prison.
I did have
So
another point for that, by the
yeah.
way. So going back to
Okay.
that debate, so Haku said when people are protecting something truly precious to them, they can truly become stronger. Kakashi was
Mhm.
protecting Team 7 in this scene. He can do anything.
I mean, yeah, I agree
It's
that
narratively
he
consistent.
could have a mental amp there, but I think that I agree that he could have a mental amp there based on like how mental amps work. But